Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 68, with my guest co-host today, Richard Messing. Hello, Richard. How are you doing?
Doing great, Hassan. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this podcast with you today.
Awesome. I'm really glad for you to be here, and we're going to be reading today from our book. And I'll talk a little bit about the background of this book on the podcast in just a moment here. But today we are reading from the Washington Square Press edition, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And I pick up from Man's Search for Meaning from the experiences in a concentration camp. And I quote, "When one examines the vast amount of material which has been amassed as a result of many prisoners' observations and experiences, three phases of the inmate's mental reactions to camp life become apparent. The period following his admission, the period when he is well entrenched in camp routine, and the period following his release and liberation. The symptom that characterizes the first phase is shock. Under certain conditions, shock may even precede the prisoner's formal admission to the camp. I shall give as an example the circumstances of my own admission. 1,500 persons had been traveling by train for several days and nights. There were 80 people in each coach. All had to lie on top of their luggage, the few remnants of their personal possessions. The carriages were so full that only the top parts of the windows were free to let in the gray of dawn. Everyone expected the train to head for some munitions factory in which it would be employed as forced labor. We did not know whether we were still in Silesia or already in Poland. The engine's whistle had an uncanny sound like a cry for help sent out in commiseration for the unhappy load which it was destined to lead into perdition. Then the train shunted, obviously nearing a main station. Suddenly a cry broke from the ranks of the anxious passengers. There was a sign, Auschwitz. Everyone's heart missed a beat at that moment. Auschwitz, the very name stood for all that was horrible. Gas chambers, crematoriums, massacres. Slowly, almost hesitatingly, the train moved on, as if it wanted to spare its passengers the dreadful realization as long as possible. Auschwitz. With the progressive dawn, the outlines of an immense camp became visible. Long stretches of several rows of barbed wire fences, watchtowers, searchlights, and long columns of ragged figures, gray in the grayness of dawn. Trekking along the straight, desolate roads to what destination, we did not know. There were isolated shouts and whistles of command. We did not know their meaning. My imagination led me to see gallows with people dangling on them. I was horrified, but this was just as well, because step by step we had become accustomed to a terrible and immense horror. Eventually, we moved into the station. The initial silence was interrupted by shouted commands. We were to hear those rough, shrill tones from then on, over and over again in all the camps. Their sound was almost like the last cry of a victim, and yet there was a difference. It had a rasping hoarseness, as if it came from the throat of a man who had to keep shouting like that, a man who was being murdered again and again. The carriage doors were flung open and a small detachment of prisoners stormed inside. They wore striped uniforms, their heads were shaved, but they looked well fed. They spoke in every possible European tongue, and all with a certain amount of humor, which sounded grotesque under the circumstances. Like a drowning man clutching a straw, my inborn optimism, which has often controlled my feelings, even in the most desperate situations, clung to this thought. These prisoners look quite well. They seem to be in good spirits and even laugh. Who knows? I might manage to share their favorable position. In psychiatry, there is a certain condition known as delusion of reprieve. The condemned man, immediately before his execution, gets the illusion that he might be reprieved at the very last minute. We, too, clung to shreds of hope and believed to the last moment that it would not be so bad. Just the sight of the red cheeks and round faces of these prisoners was a great encouragement. Little did we know then that they formed a specially chosen elite who for years had been the receiving squad for new transports as they rolled into the station day after day. They took charge of the new arrivals and their luggage, including scarce items and smuggled jewelry. Auschwitz must have been a strange spot in this Europe of the last years of the war. There must have been unique treasures of gold and silver, platinum and diamonds, not only in the huge storehouses, but also in the hands of the SS. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl ranks quite possibly in the top 5 of globally of narratives that critically and psychologically and even ethically, which we're going to talk about today, examines the fundamental nature of totalitarianism, suffering, and of course, meaning. It sits on a tiny bookshelf next to The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, The Rape of Nanking by Irish Chang, and Night by Eli Wiesel as a testament to the problems of a nihilistic worldview when genuine, totalizing, and I will use a deeply religious term here, satanic evil manifests itself fully in the world. Now, we've talked about Gulag Archipelago on this podcast, in episode number 16, and Man's Search for Meaning is a complement to that study, to that episode that we covered that book on for leaders. Here's a little bit about Viktor Frankl. I'm going to front load this because normally I talk a little bit about the author, because I think that's important for context. So Viktor Frankl was born in March of 1905 and died in September of 1997. As a Jewish Austrian teenager, he began corresponding with Sigmund Freud via mail and eventually studied medicine at the University of Vienna in 1923. In 1937, he began a private practice, but the Nazi annexation of Austria in 1938 ensured that his path would lead directly to the Theresienstadt concentration camp. Now, pause on this, and if you go and you look online, if you go and look on the internet, you will see that there are some controversies around Viktor Frankl and around his memoir of his time in the concentration camps. There are some survivors of the concentration camps who have critiqued his examination, have critiqued his documentation, and have even questioned Frankl and what he did to survive, including some Jewish survivors accuse him of conducting surgeries and collaborating with the Nazis while in the camps in order to live. Now, we're not going to get into the weeds with all of that. Like I said, if you want to go and explore that, you can go ahead and look. Our posture on this podcast is we take the book and we take the man who wrote the book at his word. We have to, because that's all we've got in this, the almost, 80 years past the Nazi horrors. Look, surviving the horrors of a totalitarian system specifically designed to grind a person out of existence while also draining the last bit of will to work out of him in the service of a war machine designed to bring about an apocalyptic ending to Western civilization. Well, this was only one of the several degradations that Frankl witnessed. And fundamentally, we can't take this away from him, survived to write a record of. So today on the podcast, we'll be unwrapping all of this, including Viktor Frankl's attempt to address totalitarian evil. And this was his attempt to do it, to stare it in the face and figure out how do you deal with that. But to do it in light of an absence of an appeal to God and the transcendent. And we're going to explore what that approach might mean for leaders, followers, and for all of us in the West. And this, the year of our Lord, 2023, with our guest today, Richard Messing. Once again, how you doing, Richard? And thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it. And I'd like you to start off by telling listeners a little bit about yourself and why you're here, and what you think about this book, Man's Search for Meaning. Let's start with that.
Okay. First, I'm 68 years old, and I'm Jewish. I grew up in a typical middle-class Jewish home, secular home. So I had no religious instruction growing up, and didn't even go to Hebrew school. We didn't have a bar mitzvah until I was 20 years old, and I walked out of the student union of Stony Brook University one summer day, and some black hat Jews were standing there and invited me into their truck to have a bar mitzvah. That's my bar mitzvah. So I had an unusual experience growing up as a middle class Jewish boy from Long Island, and so I didn't become religious myself. I didn't start dabbling in religion until I was 35, and now I am deeply a devout Jew. But the work that I'm doing is in the field of ethics, and it's not in the field of religion. It's in the field of understanding the chronic nature of the human condition. So if you want to understand the human condition, you can't ignore religion, since religion has always been a part of the human condition. And so religion does inform my understanding of the human condition, and I hope to share some of that today. Viktor Frankl and his work as a psychiatrist. He was a psychiatrist. He was not a surgeon. He was a psychiatrist. So I'm surprised to hear that some people, accused him of doing surgery while he was at concentration camps. But when you're in a situation like that, anything's possible.
Right.
Anything is possible. And so people are capable of doing things that they never imagined they were capable of doing when you're under certain pressures. And so, but I didn't come here to defend Viktor Frankl. I've read his book a long time ago. It was and remembered certain things about his book that I never forgot. And so there's no question that Viktor Frankl understood the human condition at a very deep level. His logotherapy that he developed, that methodologies as a therapist, was extremely successful, had a lot of followers. And I don't know if it's still in fashion today. I don't think so, but I do believe that those who are in the field of psychotherapy do study, what he developed. And so I think it's very relevant to my work, because my work is very much about ethics and the relationship between ethics and meaning. And so that's why I'm very excited about this podcast.
Well, you've mentioned a lot of things there. The relationship between ethics and meaning, the relationship, or not the relationship, but the impact of logotherapy on that work, right? And you've also talked a little bit about, and I thank you for giving us a little bit of your background, because those were even things that I didn't even know coming into the podcast. But how your background informs understanding the chronic nature of the human condition, right? So let me ask you a follow-up question. Let's start with that, the chronic nature of the human condition. One of the things that all three of those books that I named, all four of them that I named, Night by Eli Wiesel, The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang, Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which again, we covered that one on the podcast. And of course, this book, Man's Search for Meaning. Those books are about staring at the ugly parts of the human condition. They are an attempt to wrest sanity from a space where the insane has been, to use a modern term, normalized. I think they are also, all of these books, including Man's Search for Meaning, and we'll talk a little bit about Frankl's work on logotherapy, because I think his work on logotherapy was an attempt to navigate existential distress, and we're going to talk a lot about that, but the existential distress, and to separate that from genuine mental health issues, which, by the way, even he says are not the same thing. So that's the context or the background for my question here on the chronic nature of human condition, my follow-up question here. When we look at the chronic nature of the human condition, well, I mean, it's the perennial question, right? Why do bad things happen to good people? And I'm not being flippant here. I mean, Frankl was minding his own business, just as every other Jew was in Europe. in the early part of the 20th century. Religious or not, they were minding their own business. And look, I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. twice, actually. And I've been to the traveling display a third time. And the thing that kills me the most about going to that place, and you can't talk about Frankl without talking about the Holocaust, but the thing that kills me the most about that is once you lay it out, you can see the steps that the National Socialists took, particularly after they got in power, that were going to lead inevitably to a place like Auschwitz. That's why the final solution, as horrifically horrible a titling of that thing is actually horrifically accurate. It's horrifically accurate. It's a dead target, right, for what that ideology was aiming at. And they said it out loud. Right. They said it out loud. Right. So why do bad things happen to good people? Like, you're the ethics guy. So why are they behaving? Because that's the first thing that like my listeners are going to, why do leaders behave unethically? Why? And by the way, after example after example after example of how this doesn't work and it leads you down a bad path, and yet we still wind up in the same place. And we're front loading the hard question early. So let's just get it out of the way.
Well, first of all, why do bad things happen to good people is only half the story.
Yeah.
Why do good things happen to bad people?
Right. That's half of the story. Yes.
Right?
Right.
And so this is a classic Jewish religious question. Moses asked God that question. And so I'll say it's paradoxical, obviously. And so, paradox is part of my work, but I'm not going to get into that now. But there is a way to explain this, but it requires a significant amount of time and to go into detail. But it has to do with, there's a theological explanation for this given by a sage called the Ramchal, Rabbi Luzzatto. He was an Italian rabbi, a sage, one of the most, respected sages, of all time. He's written, 26 books. The guy died at an early age, but he was so prolific. It's hard to imagine how a human being could have produced what he produced. He has an explanation for this, but there's a whole book on it. I have the book right here. It's called The Way of God. If anyone was interested, this is the book.
Yeah.
This is the book, The Way of God, by Luzzatto. You buy the book, he explains it.
You buy the book, you get the answer to the question.
Exactly. But essentially, and this is one of the reasons why ethics is mysterious. When I say mysterious, what I mean is that if I asked you, do you think the world needs to become more ethical? Yes. You will say, what are you kidding? Look at what's going on in the world. It's obviously it needs to become more ethical. Almost everyone responds that way. If I said to you on a scale from 1 to 10, how important is ethics to you? Like, how important do you think it is? If 10 was most important and 1 was not very important. What's your answer?
It's a 10, yeah. It's very important.
It's a 10.
Yeah.
So then I have to say, well, if this is so obvious, do I have to show you data to convince you that ethics is important, that the world needs to become more ethical? Do you have to see data on this?
No, I just look around my own life. No, I don't need data.
Exactly. So why isn't the public school system requiring 1 course on ethics? Why don't the universities? If you're a math major, a physics major, a biology major, you don't have to take a course on ethics. Yeah. They don't require what? How can that be? That's a mystery. Now, so you see that you get the mystery?
Yeah, I get the mystery.
It's a mystery.
Oh, yeah.
Why is this? I suggest the reason is the following. In order to be ethical, or not ethical or unethical. You have to be free to choose between right and wrong. You have to be completely free, regardless of what's going on around you or inside of you psychologically or outside of you. You can't control all this stuff. But when it comes down to making a decision between right and wrong, you have to be free to make that decision. Because if you're not free, if something else is determining your choice, you can't claim to be ethical and you can't claim to be unethical because something else is causing you to make the choice. That maybe that thing's ethical or unethical, but it's not you.
Right.
So what is that other thing? That's the question. And so you have to have free will.
Yeah.
In order to be ethical or unethical. And the problem with free will is, well, put it to you this way. There's no freedom in the physical world. Nothing physical is free. Everything physical is determined. Everything is physical. In the physical world, it's programmed by the laws of physics and chemistry, and those laws aren't changing. And so there's no freedom in the physical world. Therefore, if free will exists, it has to be non-physical. And guess what? That's the thing people have a problem with. The non-physical world. Is there such a thing as a non-physical world? You can't measure it.
Right.
You can't taste it. You can't see it.
Right.
So you have to believe that there is such a thing.
Right.
And that's the mystery. That's my suggestion, my assertion. That's the reason why there's this enormous mystery about ethics. Everybody says it's important, but yet no one's teaching it. No one's, And no
one's pushing that idea. Yeah.
so I hope I'm clear about what I'm saying.
No, I mean that's clear. I mean, look, it opens up a whole can of worms, right? Because there's people who suffer, right? So let's go to suffering, right? Let's go to the Buddhist conception of suffering, right? So the Buddhist, if I had a Buddhist here, a Buddhist would say, fundamentally, without getting into the complications of it, that all of life is suffering, and that the role of the individual is to basically exist through that suffering, and there's a giant blank space after that. Or the nihilist, the nihilist. And by the way, on this podcast, and I've been blunt about it before, and I'll be blunt about it again. I got a huge problem with Nietzsche. I just do. I think that wily German with the bushy mustache that sits in the sub basement of Western thought was given way too much authority and control and power over the philosophy of the West. And that has had massive deleterious impact over the last 120 years. But no one wants to go down to the basement and dislodge Nietzsche. And so I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to say that Nietzsche was a liar, actually. I've said that a couple of times on this podcast. I think he did a really interesting two-step of two lies with a truth buried in between them. And so that means that his lies outstripped the truth. But no one is brave enough to call Nietzsche a liar. And he was lying because fundamentally, while he was talking about, and this is how this relates to free will, while he was talking about transcendence, or while he was announcing the death of transcendence and the death of God, he wasn't really making a prescription about where you go next. He was that blank space in the Buddhist conception of what you do after that. So you killed God, so what?
Yeah, right.
What do we do now?
Exactly.
Right. What do we do now? And so what that does is that leaves Western man, and this is the thing with the problem with the Buddhist version of suffering and the nihilist's version of suffering, which eventually winds up in Albert Camus and existentialism and all that. But the Buddhist version of suffering and the nihilist version of suffering both wind up in a place where there's other people. And people have to fill the vacuum. People have to have meaning. Without meaning, they cannot do anything. They cannot take action. They cannot engage with what you have so graciously described here as free will. At least in my conception, they can't do it. Those meaning and free will are intimately linked. When we think about ethics, though, we want to sort of disperse that from free will. We want to sort of put it over there, or we want to sort of make it its own thing. And I think that's why it doesn't get covered. Plus, here's the other dynamic, Richard. I think that free will confounds scientific materialism. There's no language for it in scientific materialism. Things that are materialistic and deterministic cannot conceive of things that are immaterial or unmaterialistic or undetermined. Right. It just can't. Right. It's outside its worldview. And so anything that's outside the worldview gets shunted out, right?
Right. So it's actually a threat to them. It's threatening to them.
Right.
It's a threat.
Well, and then you get to the logical conclusion of a lot of this, which we are at right now in 2023. I do believe that we are at the end of the postmodern experiment. I think we're at the end of deconstructionism. I think that guys like, Yuval Noah Harari and all those other knuckleheads that are having secret meetings with each other, I think they're late gamers. I think they're late to the game.
They're having secret meetings?
Yeah, they're all having secret meetings.
I guess they invited you because
Well, occasionally some of the secrets leak out because all the water can't stay in the bucket. So, all the people that are going to the secret meetings and all of that, they don't have any solutions because they don't know what's going on either. And so the people who are going to figure this out are going to be the leaders on the ground, which is why I do this podcast. The leaders on the ground are going to figure this out. The leaders who are going to make the next steps ethically and who are going to go past scientific materialism and go past that determinism and even go past nihilism and Buddhism towards something else. They are working in our civic organizations. They are leading our families. They are in our churches, in our synagogues, in our mosques. They are in our neighborhoods. That's who's going to do it. It ain't going to be the people who have attained quote unquote power, whatever that may mean. They're way too far away. They don't know what's going on.
Right. The people with the big audiences.
Yeah. The people with the big audiences. I'm not going to say they're not powerful. They've got power.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they do.
But at the end of the day, power
can be ethical or unethical.
Right. Exactly.
And they could be very well-meaning. Yuval Harari is a very well-meaning person. He's a well-meaning person. Okay? I like the guy, but I think he's dangerous.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about how we got here. And Frankl gives us a framework for talking a little bit about this idea that I have. And you even mentioned it a little bit as well when you were talking about sort of not only the chronic nature of the human condition, but also how Moses asked a paradoxical question, and it has become the paradoxical question, quite frankly, of humanity. It wasn't just limited to a little tribe of individuals in Israel. It has expanded, right? Because it is a question of the human condition. And so Frankl talks a little bit about this idea, particularly as it relates to trauma and suffering. So I want to go back to the book a little bit. I want to go back to Man's Search for Meaning. I want to pick up with a little bit of a different idea here. And we're going to try to bring some threads together here, but I want to explore a couple of different ideas here with Frankl. So back to the book, back to Man's Search for Meaning, back to experiences in a concentration camp. Because of the high degree of undernourishment which the prisoners suffered, it was natural that the desire for food was the major primitive instinct around which mental life centered. Let us observe the majority of prisoners, when they happened to work near each other, were for once not closely watched. They would immediately start discussing food. One fellow would ask another, working next to him in the ditch, what his favorite dishes were. Then they would exchange recipes and plan the menu for the day when they would have a reunion, the day in a distant future when they would be liberated and returned home. They would go on, picturing it all in detail until suddenly a warning was passed down the trench, usually in the form of a special password or number. The guard is coming. I always regarded the discussions about food as dangerous. Is it not wrong to provoke The organism, with such detailed and effective pictures of delicacies when it has somehow managed to adapt itself to extremely small rations and low calories. Though it may afford momentary psychological relief, it is an illusion which physiologically surely must not be without danger. During the latter part of our imprisonment, the daily ration consisted of a very watery soup given out once a daily, and the usual small bread ration. In addition to that, there was a so-called extra allowance consisting of 3/4 of an ounce of margarine, or of a slice of poor quality sausage, or a little piece of cheese, or a little bit of synthetic honey, or a spoonful of watery jam, varying daily. In calories, this diet was absolutely inadequate, especially taking into consideration our heavy manual work and our constant exposure to the cold and inadequate clothing. The sick who were under special care, that is, those who were allowed to lie in the huts instead of leaving the camp for work, were even worse off. When the last layers of subcutaneous fat had vanished and we looked like skeletons disguised with skin and rags, we could watch our bodies beginning to devour themselves. The organism digested its own protein and the muscles disappeared, and the body had no powers of resistance left. One after another, the members of the little community in our hut died. Each of us could calculate with fair accuracy whose turn would be next and when his own would come. After many observations, we knew the symptoms well, which made the correctness of our prognoses quite certain. He won't last long, or this is the next one, we whispered to each other. And when, during our daily search for lice, we saw our own naked bodies in the evening, we thought alike, this body here, my body, is really a corpse already. What has become of me? I am but a small portion of a great mass of human flesh, a mass behind barbed wire crowded into a few earthen huts, a mass of which daily a certain portion begins to rot because it has become lifeless. I mentioned above how unavoidable were the thoughts about food and favorite dishes which forced themselves into the consciousness of the prisoner whenever he had a moment to spare. Perhaps it can be understood then that even the strongest of us was longing for the time when he would have fairly good food again, not for the sake of good food itself, but for the sake of knowing that the subhuman existence which had made us unable to think of anything other than food would at last cease. Those who have not gone through a similar experience can hardly conceive of the soul-destroying mental conflict and clashes of willpower which a famished man experienced. They could hardly grasp what it means to stand digging in a trench, listening only for the siren to announce 9:30 or 10 a.m., the half-hour lunch interval, when bread would be rationed out, as long as it was still available. Repeatedly asking the foreman, if he wasn't a disagreeable fellow, what the time was, and tenderly touching a piece of bread in one's coat pocket, first stroking it with frozen gloveless fingers, then breaking off a crumb and putting it in one's mouth, and finally, with the last bit of willpower, pocketing it again, having promised oneself that morning to hold out until afternoon. We could hold endless debates on the sense or nonsense of certain methods of dealing with the small bread ration, which is given out only once daily during the latter part of our confinement. There were two schools of thought. One was in favor of eating up the ration immediately. This had the twofold advantage of satisfying the worst hunger pains for a very short time, at least once a day, and of safeguarding against possible theft or loss of the ration. The second group, which held with dividing the ration up, used different arguments. I finally joined their ranks. The most ghastly moment of the 24 hours of camp life was the awakening, when, at a still nocturnal hour, the three shrill blows of a whistle tore us pitilessly from our exhausted sleep and from the longings in our dreams. We then began the tussle with our wet shoes, into which we could scarcely force our feet, which were swollen and sore with edema. And there were the usual moans and groans about petty troubles, such as the snapping of wires which replaced shoelaces. One morning I heard someone whom I knew to be brave and dignified cry like a child because he had finally had to go to the snowy marching grounds in his bare feet, as his shoes were too shrunken for him to wear. In those ghastly minutes, I found a little bit of comfort. A small piece of bread, which I drew out of my pocket and munched with absorbed delight. Even in the pursuit of totalitarian goals, and I mentioned going to the Holocaust Museum and being sort of blown away by how incremental the Nazi regime was. And the Nazi regime was in pursuit of the totalitarian goal of grinding people down. They knew something that ethical people or people who are good seem to miss about evil people. Here's what they knew. They knew that big swings don't work. It's the small everyday grind on a human being, even in a concentration camp scenario, that transforms, it transmogrifies, it grinds down the human spirit into human dust. Good people, if you're listening to the podcast, if you think of yourself as good, if you think of yourself as a person who would never be a totalitarian camp guard, right? If you identify more, and Jordan Peterson says this very often, and it is true, if you identify more with the victims of Auschwitz or the Gulag than you do with the perpetrators, you've kind of missed the evil in your heart. Good people need to recognize that evil lies in small details. It lurks around the corner, right? It doesn't just come about because of large, big swings. Look, if you're going to steal from your company, you're not going to start with $1 million. You're going to start with the paper clips. If you're going to cheat on your wife, you're not going to start by going to the person that's closest to you and saying, hey, you want to go to the hotel? No, you're going to start with the pornography on your phone. If you want to steal money, if you want to engage in murder, even that good Jew Jesus said this, if you're going to engage in murder, you're going to start in your heart first. You're going to start with small hates, small envies that build up over the course of time. That's an idea, and I take this term from the theologian and author and writer Doug Wilson, operating up in Idaho, so it's not my term, but it does work here. It's called smash mouth incrementalism, because that's what evil does to you, right? Like smash mouth football back in the day. We're just going to grind you and grind you and grind you on every down. That's what evil does to you. It grinds you down day after day. The envies, the lusts, the greeds. But I'm a good person, you say. Well, okay. If you want to defeat an evil ideology, words matter. You must recognize what that evil is. You must label it accurately, and then you must design, and this is very important, a doctrine of optimistic victory to overcome it. But it's got to be based on a worldview. This is what Augustine did. But you have to have a positive vision of the future in order to make this work. And you have to take the long view. There is a meaning crisis going on right now in the West, and we didn't wind up here in big swings. We wound up here incrementally. And so, Richard, when I read Man's Search for Meaning, it's even it's right there in the title. How do we solve the problem of meaning? How do we make, in Frankl's case, he was searching for the answer for how to make suffering meaningful, right? How to draw something out of that. But the vast majority of people who are listening to me right now, they don't even know anybody who served in World War II, much less anybody who was in a gulag or a concentration camp. That's almost gone out of history now. Our sufferings are, I can't get Netflix, or I might have to miss a meal today.
That's not suffering.
Right. Well, you see this in the rise of.
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? Yeah. You see this in the rise of stoicism, right? Where people have anxiety, and they're equating that anxiety with suffering.
Anxiety is suffering. Anxiety is suffering.
Well,
anxiety is suffering.
Well, let's flesh that out. Like, what strikes you most? I know you said you read Frankl a while ago, and so a lot of this may be reminders, but I want you to think about your work and Frankl's work. How do we approach and solve the problem of meaning in the 20th century? Like, how do we do that for folks?
First, I want to comment on a few things that what you said. I totally agree with you, and it's a basic Jewish concept that that evil and what we're talking about, the enemy. Right, the enemy, right? It's definitely inside of us. Another great sage, Rabbi Bachya, 900 years ago, wrote a book called Duties of the Heart. Again, one of the greatest, most studied, repeatedly studied Jewish texts by all Torah scholars. Says point blank, our number one enemy is inside of us. We call it in Judaism the evil inclination.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so and it's sitting in wait, looking for every opportunity to get our attention and to get us to do what it wants us to do.
Isn't that in the Cain story, the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis, right?
Yeah.
So
God says he's knocking at your door.
Yeah, he's lurking, right? I think of the King James version; it doesn't matter, but like the translation there is similar in tone of the idea, right? Evil lurks at your doorstep, and it's almost it's almost a lust type idea there, that evil is desiring you, right?
I don't even think but I personally don't believe that this evil is a non-physical thing. I believe that just like there's artificial intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
right? Highly powerful computing systems
Mm-hmm.
that are able to create models of our own behavior. Those AI systems, when you go onto Facebook, right? You go onto Instagram, their AI systems are recording every single thing you do on their platform, every like, every dislike, how many seconds you spend on every page, what you buy, what you don't buy. They build a behavioral model of you so that the next time you come back, they know exactly what messages to send you, to keep you on their platform, to control your behavior. And that's how they sell you to their advertisers. It's my professional opinion, after studying and working this out, studying the human condition, and I teach this in my course, The Change Agent, that this is exactly what our own nervous system is doing to us. It's watching us constantly. Why? Because we have a free will. Because we can say no to our own nervous system, right? Your nervous system says it's time to go to the bathroom. So it sends that feeling, which you never ask for, right? You never choose to feel like going to the bathroom. It happens to you.
Right. Yeah.
But we can say, no, I'm not going now. I'm doing something else. So we have the power to contradict our own nervous system. When you feel hungry, did you choose to be hungry? No. When we get hungry, we can say no to our own nervous system and go off and do something else and eat later.
Mm-hmm.
An animal can't do that. And when an animal gets hungry, it has to seek food. It doesn't have a free will to say no to its own nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So, because of this, the biological intelligence system, called our nervous system, the BI system, it has a deep belief that there is this other power that follows it around. Wherever it goes, so does the free will go. And therefore, its relationship with our free will is an adversarial relationship. So it's constantly trying to figure out how to control our free will and how to get us to listen to it and to do what it wants us to do in order to survive in the world, because it believes it knows how to survive.
Well,
now,
even those discussions that Frankl was talking about in that section that I was referencing, right, that we were reading, you don't have to have a conversation about food.
Right, exactly. You think they're choosing? You think those people are deciding, hey, you want to talk about food now? No. A signal comes into the mind. The nervous system sends in a signal. Food. Think about food now. Yeah. It's sending in those signals. And when you're in that condition, when you're starving to death and you're listening to that, it's actually enticing.
Mm-hmm.
It's enticing. It's tempting.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably makes that kind of a person who's starving to death, who's in a concentration camp, to feel better by thinking about it.
Well, and even Frankl said that there was it might have been psychologically, even said this in the piece we read, it might have been psychologically beneficial, but physiologically it was not, right? In the physiology of the body, it wasn't the best thing, right? Because of this nervous system that's being activated in ways that basically, and this is sort of what he's leading to, are causing the body to eat itself, are causing the body to search for that sustenance, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
By the way, all systems that are not, that don't include ethical principles eventually destroy themselves. We know this, even civilizations, right?
Yeah.
Civilizations decline and destroy them. The civilization destroys itself when it gets to a point when it becomes fat and happy, right? And morality becomes unimportant.
mhm.
And then the civilization just, self-destructs.
Right. Why is that? Because you get a lot of, so I mentioned nihilism and I mentioned suffering. And we're on a path with this project that I call this podcast. And it is a project. It's a long-term project. I'll be doing this for a while. We are on a path to put bricks in the path to save the West, fundamentally. And I think by restoring and recognizing and acknowledging traditions in the past, particularly our literary traditions, or primarily our literary traditions of the past, I believe that by bringing those to the forefront, we can put bricks in the path for a way to get out of this meaning crisis, to get out of this crisis and move towards something else in the West. I fundamentally believe this. That's why I show up and do this. And there's bricks that need to be laid to the path for Shakespeare to Jane Austen, and from Viktor Frankl to, even to J.R.R. Tolkien, right? And I believe we used to know this, by the way, in the West, but we didn't have to be explained to us. We just sort of consumed it, right? And now we're at a spot where we need to have it explained. So I say all that to ask this follow-up question: If we are in an adversarial relationship with ourselves, which I fundamentally believe that you're correct, and nation states, which are larger systems of basically what's going on inside of individuals, are at war with themselves, right? It's just a scale issue, right? At that point, how do we know where is the location of meaning if it's not in the body, right? Because the body is the thing. This is why scientific materialism has taken off in the 20th century. Because we did a lot of amazing things in the 20th century. We did a lot. We can't take that away from human beings. Like, yes, there was totalitarian tyranny. Yes, there were gulags and concentration camps and Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. And yes, like Chairman Mao and the Long March and all of that. 100 million dead people. We talk about it on the podcast all the time. But there was also Henry Ford and people moving from farms to factories, and more wealth created in more parts of the world because of globalization than at any other time in human history. Human beings did that too. It wasn't all just negative.
It's paradoxical.
It's paradoxical, right? So if I'm in 2023 or 2024 or whatever the heck I'm listening to this podcast, I'm looking for a way forward because those 20th century modes aren't going to work for me anymore. If I'm looking for a way forward and all I still have is the body, I'm trapped in here. I can't get out. How do I overcome the body? How do I overcome this adversarial relationship?
Right. Okay. It's actually, in my opinion, not that complicated. It's paradoxical. It's not complicated. It's paradoxical. So in other words, what I'm saying is, number one, you have to understand the paradoxical nature of it. If you don't understand that, then you're not going to be able to find that way out. And so I'll put it to you very simply. If somebody lies to you and you don't know they're lying, right, you might believe them. If you believe that lie, you now have false information about reality, about the world. You think the world is this way when it's really this way. And you're not going to know that you have that false information. Therefore, you can't know what your false beliefs are. Correct? If you can't know what your false beliefs are, you can't know how many you have. You could have a mountain of false beliefs and not know it. It's like an iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
Picture an iceberg, right? You see the tip of the iceberg above the water,
Mm-hmm.
but you have no idea how much of the iceberg is below the water. That's
Right.
why ships crashed into icebergs and got destroyed.
Right.
That's the human condition. It's inevitable that we have false beliefs, and we can't know how many we have.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and let's say someone tells you something that they believe is true. They're not lying. They believe it's true. It makes complete sense. You believe it, but it's really false. Neither of you know it's false, but now you got another false belief about the world. And then you tell your friend about it, and they believe it. Now they've got the false belief. You can quickly see. Quickly see how rapidly human beings can acquire false information about the world, and then pass it down from generation to generation.
So this is why I wanted to get you on the podcast, because this is a very, if I may be so bold, this is a very Judaic way of looking at this. Very much so. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon your perspective, we live in a world that is, like I said, driven by scientific materialism, which endlessly searches for an answer to that because it doesn't like a lack of utility as an answer to questions, and it doesn't like mystery.
I want to give you half of my answer.
Oh, you only give me half the answer. Okay, so you're going to get to the utility and the lack of mystery. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, because that is the pushback, by the way.
You said it's in the body, right? How do we deal with this? Well, if it's true that we are full of false information about the world, which could be about God also. I mean, do I know that God really exists? I'm a devout Jew. I believe in God. Do I know with certainty he exists? He hasn't introduced himself to me yet. Okay?
Okay.
So, we can't, if you don't know what your false beliefs are, you can't be sure what your true beliefs are.
Right. Okay.
Okay? That's just little logic. That's simple logic.
Yeah.
Now, so the answer is you have to have an external source of wisdom to help you correct your false beliefs. And when you're making decisions, right? When you're talking about decision making, how do we get people to make better decisions, more ethical decisions? Mm-hmm. Well, we can't trust ourselves wholeheartedly, because if we're full of false information, our nervous system doesn't know that it's false. We don't know that it's false. I just gave you the logic.
Right.
And therefore, you have to have some external source of wisdom to help you correct your false beliefs and to learn more true beliefs about the human condition and the world. And so that's called an ethics framework. That's called the framework of ethics. So that's why ethics is so vitally important, to help us to optimize our decisions.
An ethics framework. I like how you put that. An ethics framework to optimize our decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because we can't rely on our own database of information about the world, because I just gave you the logic. It's inevitable we have false beliefs. It's also inevitable that we have some true beliefs. But,
so wait, it used to be even in my time, and I'm in my mid-40s, so I'm a young man, depending upon which room I'm in, or I'm an old man, depending upon which room I'm in. Right? I'm in that weird middle ground. Of
right now, you're a young man. Right now, you're a young man.
Yeah. And this is what everybody keeps telling me. My knees do not agree. Anyway, it used to be, and I'm old enough to remember this. Right? I'm probably the youngest and of the oldest generation that remembers when what I was told by my parents, and maybe not directly told, but just sort of like this was what was in the air. You could intuit it. The world is fine because the world is that external framework, right? You're screwed up. You fix yourself to conform to the world. We've now reversed that. And we've said the world's screwed up. You're fine. and the world has to shift its framework to you. Made an idol out of individualism, right?
Right. That's right. That's right.
That
That's right.
crushes meaning, right? Because if the world is messed up and I'm fine, then what do I need an ethics framework for? I'm fine.
Exactly.
It's the world that needs the framework. I'm fine.
Exactly. People have it completely reversed. They've got it completely reversed. That's what's going on in Western civilization now. It's upside down. Now, so I just want to finish up my answer to your question.
Well, we're thinking and we're talking. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. The answer is if you need an external source of wisdom, that's what the Bible is. That's what the Bible is. That's why, from the Jewish perspective, that's why God came down and gave humanity, not just the Jewish people, humanity, the Bible.
Yep.
Because he looked down at the way humanity was functioning up until that point, and he was disgusted.
Well, we're partisans for the Bible. We're a pro-Bible podcast. We believe the Bible should be explored. I'm
just saying.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we just did an episode, a couple episodes back, episode number 65, where we talked about First Kings, Second Kings, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, right? In the King James version of the Bible. Your mileage may vary, Richard, but that's how I have it in my Bible. And what we talked about was how the stories of the kings of Israel and the chronicles of various individuals after Judges and even after David, time of David and Solomon, they create a framework for understanding how, yes, ethics operates, but even more importantly, the relationship of the individual to the state, the relationship of the individual to the civil magistrate. Because we go from Judges, which ends with that horrible statement in the book of Judges, everyone in Israel did what was right in his own eyes, basically, which is that's problematic. Yeah. To use a modern term, that's problematic. Exactly. We move in stages through a series of, shall we say, particularly after Solomon. And actually, I think Solomon wasn't that great, even though he built the temple. He fell. He
fell at the end.
Yeah, he did. We moved through a series of worse and worse kings. I mean, Rehoboam, Jeroboam. Probably the best one out of the bunch was King Josiah, the boy king. There were a few other ones that were kind of okay. But for the most part, most kings, whether it was in Judah or in Israel, were kind of like Ahab. They were kind of doing whatever they wanted. And then you'd have a prophet like a Jeremiah come along. And we even explored the story of Jeremiah and Ahab, which is my personal favorite, one of my personal favorite stories in the Old Testament, where Jeremiah basically calls on God to light the pyre on fire with the priests of Baal, and then he runs them down and kills them all. I love that one. But then right after that, in the very few verses later, he's hiding underneath a tree and he's depressed because Jezebel's after him. Like this whole story arc, right? He goes from talking ridiculous prophet smack to the prophets of Baal and to Ahab. I mean, and Ahab was there. The civil magistrate was there to see the role of religion, right? To see God come down from the sky. You talked about how God hasn't talked to you. Yeah. Well, guess what? He talked to Ahab.
You're right.
And then Jeremiah, and Jeremiah's there. Everybody's there, and then he arcs into being underneath a tree and being depressed. So it's that whole human arc, right? Jeremiah was a human being just like we all are.
That's right. The whole Bible, the whole thing, it doesn't hide anything. It shows even these great people were flawed.
Right.
I mean, it's not hiding anything. It's showing the human condition. And so that's why I always took the whole approach to the Bible, as I wanted to learn about the human condition from the Bible.
Okay.
because there's probably no better description of the human condition than the Bible. And so that's been my approach since the beginning, because I didn't know Hebrew, and I had no religious instruction growing up, and so I didn't really think I was able to actually do it the way the religious Jews do it, and so I just that's actually anyway. So that was my approach. So what's your point, though? What's your point?
Well, my point is that, and I'm going to lead into Frankl here a little bit because he talks about religious belief. So Frankl, and we noted this. We read the Gulag Archipelago. Solzhenitsyn noted this too in the Gulag, right, in the Soviet Gulag. There would be people who would switch underneath extreme conditions. So you'd have somebody who would come in a secular atheist, a committed secular atheist, into a concentration camp situation or a Gulag situation, and all of a sudden they'd switch over to being devoutly religious. And if they survived for the remainder of their days, right? But then you'd have people who came in devoutly religious who would switch over and become the worst sort of secular materialist atheists trying to get along with, the SS guards, trying to collect, all that kind of stuff, right? And Frankl talks a little bit about religious belief, and so I want to sort of use that idea as a lead-in to what I'm about to talk about here. So, back to the book, back to Man's Search for Meaning. We're going to use this as a lead-in to a much larger idea. We're going to keep a focus on this religion as an ethical framework piece here. But we're going to bring in psychotherapy into it now as well. So I quote directly from Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl: "The opportunities for collective psychotherapy were naturally limited in camp. The right example was more effective than words could ever be. A senior block warden who did not side with the authorities had, by his just and encouraging behavior, 1,000 opportunities to exert a far-reaching moral influence on those under his jurisdiction. The immediate influence of behavior is always more effective than that of words. But at times a word was effective too, when mental receptiveness had been intensified by some outer circumstances. I remember an incident when there was occasion for psychotherapeutic work on the inmates of a whole hut due to an intensification of their receptiveness because of a certain external situation. It had been a bad day. On parade, an announcement had been made about the many actions that would, from then on, be regarded as sabotage and therefore punishable by immediate death by hanging. Among these were crimes such as cutting small strips from our old blankets in order to improvise ankle supports, and very minor quote-unquote thefts. A few days previously, a semi-starved prisoner had broken into the potato store to steal a few thousand pounds of potatoes, steal a few pounds of potatoes. By the way, back to hunger again, the body, okay? Just a pause there, just for note. Back to the book. The theft had been discovered, and some prisoners had recognized the burglar. When the camp authorities heard about it, they ordered that the guilty man be given up to them, or the whole camp would starve for a day. Naturally, the 2,500 men preferred to fast. On the evening of this day of fasting, we lay in our earthen huts in a very low mood. Very little was said, and every word sounded irritable. Then, to make matters even worse, the light went out. Tempers reached their lowest ebb. But our senior block warden was a wise man. He improvised a little talk about all that was on our minds at that moment. He talked about the many comrades who had died in the last few days, either of sickness or of suicide. But he also mentioned what may have been the real reason for their deaths: giving up hope. He maintained that there should be some way of preventing possible future victims from reaching this extreme state, and it was to me that the warden pointed to give this advice. God knows I was not in the mood to give psychological explanations or to preach any sermons, to offer my comrades a kind of medical care of their souls. I was cold, hungry, irritable, and tired, but I had to make the effort and use this unique opportunity. Encouragement was now more necessary than ever. So I began by mentioning the most trivial of comforts first. I said that even in this Europe in the sixth winter of the Second World War, our situation was not the most terrible we could think of. I said that each of us had to ask himself what irreplaceable losses he had suffered up to then. I speculated that for most of them, these losses had really been few. Whoever was still alive had reason for hope. Health, family, happiness, professional abilities, fortune, position in society. All these were things that could be achieved again or restored. After all, we still had our bones intact. Whatever we had gone through could still be an asset to us in the future. And I quoted from Nietzsche, "Wach mich nicht, umbricht mach ich mich starker." That which does not kill me makes me stronger. Then I spoke about the future. I said to the impartial, the future must seem hopeless. I agreed that each of us could guess for himself how small were his chances of survival. I told him that although there was still no typhus epidemic in the camp, I estimated my own chances at about 1 in 20. But I also told them that, in spite of this, I had no intention of losing hope and giving up. For no man knew what the future would bring, much less the next hour. Even if we could not expect any sensational military events in the next few days, we knew better. Who knew better than we, with our experience of camps, how great chances sometimes opened up quite suddenly, at least for the individual. For instance, one might be attached unexpectedly to a special group with exceptionally good working conditions, for this was the kind of thing which constituted the luck, quote unquote, of the prisoner. But I did not only talk of the future and the veil which was drawn over it, I also mentioned the past, all its joys, how its light shone even in the present darkness. Again, I quoted a poet to avoid sounding like a preacher myself, who had written, "Was du erbest kann kein Mach der Welt dir Raben." What you have experienced, no power on earth can take from you. Not only our experiences, but all we have done, whatever great thoughts we may have had, and all that we have suffered, all this was not lost, though it is past. We have brought it into being. Having been is also a kind of being, and perhaps the surest kind. Then I spoke of the many opportunities of giving life a meaning. I told my comrades, who lay motionless, although occasionally a sigh could be heard, that human life, under any circumstances, never ceases to have meaning, and that this infinite meaning of life includes suffering and dying, privation and death. I asked the poor creatures who listened to me attentively in the darkness of the hut to face up to the seriousness of our position. They must not lose hope, but should keep their courage in the certainty that the hopelessness of our struggle did not detract from its dignity and its meaning. I said that someone looks down on each of us in difficult hours, a friend, a wife, somebody alive or dead, or a God, by the way, capital G, and he would not expect us to disappoint him. He would hope to find us suffering proudly, not miserably, knowing how to die. And finally, I spoke of our sacrifice, which had meaning in every case. It was in the nature of the sacrifice that should appear to be pointless in the normal world, the world of material success. But in reality, our sacrifice did have a meaning. Those of us who have any religious faith, I said frankly, could understand without difficulty. I told them of a comrade who on his arrival in camp had tried to make a pact with heaven that his suffering and death should save the human being he loved from a painful end. For this man's suffering and death were meaningful. His was a sacrifice of the deepest significance. He did not want to die for nothing. None of us wanted that. The purpose of my words was to find a full meaning in our life then and there, in that hut and in that practically hopeless situation. I saw that my efforts had been successful. When the electric bulb flared up again, I saw the miserable figures of my friends limping toward me to thank me with tears in their eyes. But I have to confess here that only too rarely had I the inner strength to make contact with my companions in suffering, and that I must have missed many opportunities for doing so. I mentioned the paradigm for meaning, and I'll let you go in just a second here, Richard. I mentioned the paradigm for meaning, right? Religion and atheists and religious people switching. Frankl later on says in a speech that's printed in this version of Man's Search for Meaning that he gave in 1984, and the title of the speech was, let me pull open the book here. The title of the speech was A Case for Tragic Optimism. He gave this speech in 1984. And in that speech, he mentioned this, quote, "Existential frustration in and of itself is neither pathological nor pathogenic. A man's concern over the worthwhileness of his life is an existential distress, but it is by no means a mental illness."
I agree with that.
Yeah, so do I. I was stunned when I came across that, right?
Yeah, I couldn't relate to it. I can relate to it now, but
Yeah.
I think when I first read it, I don't think I could relate to it. But
Yeah, if I had read this when I was 20, it wouldn't have meant anything. It would have been pretty words put together, but it wouldn't have stuck with me, right?
yeah. So just to share with you, when I turned 50, I had already been working at Intel for 12 years,
Mm-hmm.
and one day the thought occurred to me, am I going to spend 8 to 10 hours a day for the rest of my life thinking about semiconductors?
Right.
It didn't sound meaningful.
Yeah.
And then I imagined being at the end of my life and looking back and realizing that, oh my God, I didn't spend my life meaningfully.
Mm-hmm.
That I couldn't tolerate. That day, I pivoted.
Mm-hmm.
It had to do with meaning. It had to do with, I have to do everything I possibly can every single day to figure out how to make my life meaningful. Most meaningful. Now, I don't know if I'd read Viktor Frankl before that happened or after that happened, probably after that, I think. But my point is this, that was existential.
Mm-hmm.
That was not a psychological disorder I was suffering from. It wasn't. I was at the top of my career. I had my children, I had a wife, I had, everything was great. As far as all that goes, I made it. I became a yuppie. The American dream.
Yeah.
But there was something very, very much missing.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was meaning. It was meaning. And that's when I pivoted, and that's when I set out on this journey that brought me here today.
Well, he even talks about it, if I may insert here. Pardon me. If I may insert here for just a moment.
I didn't mean to choke you up. I'm sorry for choking you up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Frankl says this in logotherapy in a nutshell. By declaring the man as responsible and must actualize the potential meaning of his life, I wish to stress that the true meaning of life is to be discovered in the world rather than within man or his own psyche, as though it were a closed system. I have termed this constitutive characteristic the self-transcendence of human existence. It denotes the fact that being human always points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself, be it meaning to fulfill for another human being or another human being to encounter. The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is and the more he actualizes himself. What is called self-actualization is not an attainable aim at all.
Uh-oh. You just went, you just froze. Your video
only as
just
a
froze.
side effect. I'm good. In other words, self-actualization is only possible as a side effect of self-transcendence. We have a lot of people who are in their 30s and early 40s, some of whom are in their late 20s, who were educated underneath the system of self-esteem. And self-esteem is inward looking, right? Because, well, no, I'm sorry, it's not inward looking. It's outward looking in that we are expecting other people to feed us inwardly. And the self-esteem movement in the educational system, particularly in America, and I don't know if your kids went through this, but I snatched my kids out of school, and now I homeschool my children in order to ensure that this is not perpetrated upon my children. But the self-esteem movement doesn't allow for self-transcendence. You can't get anywhere because unless other people feed you, you're done. But it's all selfish feeding. You're not feeding others. You're not pointed at something externally, like what you were talking about in your example at Intel. You said you were at the top of your career. By any measure, you were probably serving people in the correct way according to what many Christians call the world system. You were doing what you needed to do in the world in order to succeed in the world. And yet, you were not self-actualized.
That's correct. It's the opposite. A meaningful life comes from serving others. It has to do with the other, not you. That's why in Viktor Frankl's book, he tells the story of the elderly man
Yeah.
who lost his wife,
Mm-hmm.
and he was having a tremendous difficulty dealing with it, and he met Viktor Frankl, and Viktor Frankl, the elderly man said to Dr. Frankl, I can't imagine that if I had died before my wife,
Mm-hmm.
my wife would have gone through this, and it would have been horrible for her. And so he says to the elderly man, that's why you shouldn't feel so bad about your situation, because you saved your wife from going through that, because you lived. She died before you died. Had you died first, think of the suffering you saved her from. You sacrificed. See? And then he walked away feeling like, it kind of like solved his problem of what he was going through.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has to do with the other. That's what it is.
But we are told, remember I said, in our other section there, we now live in a system, and this is part of what needs to be dismantled, where the world is screwed up and I'm fine, so I don't have to serve the world. Because that's the next logical thing from that. I don't have to serve the world. The world has to serve me. That's
Right.
the self-esteem movement, right? That's the whole thing. Which, by the way, once you construct that worldview, that mountain of straw, like in the Three Little Pigs, or that house of straw, the wolf that's going to come and blow your house down are the Nazis, or whatever totalitarian ideology that comes after that, whatever tyranny comes after that. That's the wolf that's going to come blow your house down. And the problem is there's always a wolf. We're never going to get rid of the wolves, because you never get rid of the evil in the human heart, right?
Well, so particularly when the Messiah comes, all evil will leave the planet.
Right. Yes. Well, we're all looking for that.
Exactly.
We're all looking for that.
Exactly.
How do you? And this is why the work that you do is so important in ethics, because teaching, training, speaking, producing, creating content around ethics. This is why this is important, because there's no root underneath a system built on self-esteem and individual actualization and all that. There's no root there. There's no root of ethics, because why do I need to be ethical? The world is screwed up.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So how do we? Well, for me, my thought is that there is a role for religion here. And again, I'm a partisan for Christianity. I absolutely respect Judaism for sure. Islam has its own issues and problems, and I'm not going to get into that. That's not the purpose of my point here. But those big three religions, right? The big three.
Abrahamic.
The big three Abrahamic religions, correct. Those ones are in a rear guard action right now in the West, and they have been for quite some time. How do we bring religious belief back to the forefront? How do we bring that back? Because, like you said, that's the external framework, right? The Bible's the external framework. The Bible, with or without the New Testament, is the external framework, right? You could even do an external framework off of the Quran. You can do an external framework off of that, right? But you can't do an external framework off of philosophical nihilism or even psychoanalysis. Logotherapy is not going to be enough of an external framework for you. So how do we bring back religion? How do we reinsert that? Because I've been struggling with that on this podcast and trying to figure out how does that happen, right? And for me, I look at it as the postmodernist deconstructionists, the Derridians and the Michel Foucault types and all those. They were so mad at God, they wanted to deconstruct God, but they couldn't get to God. So what they did was they deconstructed the West all the way down to the cornerstone, which is the Bible. And then they kicked the Bible out and they said, that doesn't matter. Now we can build the world that we want. And that, of course, doesn't work. And that's my 120-year analysis in a nutshell. So how do we bring it back in that cornerstone? How do we tuck that back in?
Well, first of all, the actuaries have already predicted, based on population growth, that because fundamental religious people, like Orthodox Jews, Haredi Jews, which are, the extreme right of the Orthodox,
Yep.
And other, religions, the Abrahamic religions, they have many more children than those who are secular.
Correct. The evangelical Christians and the Muslims as well. Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Exactly. Okay, so actuarially, the world is becoming more religious.
Okay.
If you just look at the numbers, okay, that's just going to happen over the course of the 21st century, and so it's going to happen naturally. The idea is, can we speed it up? Can it be sped up? And so, the work that I'm doing is about ethics. Now, why ethics? Why did I decide to go into ethics? Very simply. I read an article by a consulting company called Infosys in 2017 when I decided to start my own consulting company. In that article, the author said, employers should help their employees become more human. Now, I never heard of such a thing, that an employer, a business owner, is now supposed to help their employees become more human. Okay? This was like categorically a new concept. And I Googled human and consulting, human consulting. And all these search results showed me all these consulting companies using the word human this, human that, this human service. And I'm going, oh my God, maybe this is an early trend. Now, I'm a religious Jew. The deliverable of Judaism is ethics. The bottom line, from the Bible, the whole historical thing, all the stuff that religious Jews are learning are the ethical laws of how to behave in every aspect of life for Jews.
Right.
Okay. All of that's derived from the Bible.
Yep.
Now, if ethics is the deliverable for Judaism, maybe that's what's missing from the rest of the world, maybe. And so I looked at the world and I go, yeah, the world's pretty unethical. Maybe the world could use some ethics. That's why I decided to go into ethics. And so I think that's what I'm doing. That's my contribution. That's what I'm doing. Of course, I do connect it, tangentially to, religion, tangentially, but it's not about religion itself. So I'm teaching people about the paradoxical nature of the human condition and chronic human problems. And that involves free will, which has to be, a non-physical phenomenon. And ethics is tied to that. And so there's the connection between the non-physical world and what the secular world believes in, which is physicality. So, but it requires both. If you're not free, if you don't have a free will, you are a robot. Biological robot, a puppet. And if that's what you want to believe, if that's what you think you are, that's your prerogative. I don't feel like I'm a robot. I mean, there are aspects of me that are robotic, that I do have habits, that that I behave a certain way habitually. Yeah. Human beings are robotic too. That's only one side of human beings. There's another whole side that's free. Yep. That's the side we have to understand, and that's the side of ethics. That's where ethics comes in. Now, to answer your original question, if you decide to live an ethical life, if you realize how important ethics is, and that's your discipline, you're going to learn how to be as ethical as possible. You're going to study ethics. You're going to incorporate that into your belief system. As you do that, you become more and more free. That's what happens. You don't have to be religious to be ethical. Secular ethics only takes a person so far. But there's a whole nother level above that religion provides. Scientists do not talk about the divine, the sacred, and the holy. Okay? Because they can't. Because that stuff's not physical. So if you want to hang out with the scientists, you want to believe that there's not holiness and divinity and nothing sacred, fine. Okay, hang out with the secular scientists. Not all. By the way, there's a lot of scientists that are religious. They just don't study. They know you can't study that stuff using the scientific method. That's all. And so if you want a taste of the holy, the sacred, and divine, that's all on the non-materialistic side, and it's everybody's choice whether they want to do that or not. But that's all of that provides another whole framework of ethics that you can't get to with using secular ethics, like what the philosophers gave us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's the story. That's the story.
There's one other thing here I'd like to explore, and we're going to go back to the book, because I want Frankl to respond to Richard here with another idea, which I think is also something that ethics has to address: the idea of the truth and lies. Back to the book. Back to Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, by the way, before you go, I just want to say, yes, religion is not perfect. Okay,
no.
Religion is not perfect, and so religions have to improve also. Mm-hmm. And so it's not the I just wanted to make that I wanted to add that. Okay.
No, and if we were looking for, I'm going to frame it this way: if we are chasing perfection on this side of the veil, it can never be attained in any system that involves human beings. And religion fundamentally involves human beings. That's just it. To go back to the Old Testament, Genesis occurs, and by Genesis 4, everything's off the rails. Everything's off the rails. And everything's been off the rails ever since Adam and Eve, no matter what you may think of that as a literal conception, even as a psychological conception, right? Everything's been off the rails since human beings fell into history. And there's no way around that because of the human condition, the chronic nature of the human condition, which Richard has talked about, the chronic nature of suffering and how suffering engages with us, how we build systems and then relate to them, which I've been talking about. And of course, this fourth aspect, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute, what we tell ourselves, the difference between truth and lies. Like I said, back to the book. In Auschwitz, I had laid down a rule for myself, which proved to be a good one, and which most of my comrades later followed. I generally answered all kinds of questions truthfully. When I was silent about anything that I was not expressly asked for, if I were asked my age, I gave it. If asked about my profession, I said doctor, but did not elaborate. The first morning in Auschwitz, an SS officer came to the parade ground. We had to fall into separate groups of prisoners, over 40 years, under 40 years, metal workers, mechanics, and so forth. Then we were examined for ruptures, and some prisoners had to form a new group. The group that I was in was driven to another hut where we were lined up again. After being sorted out once more and having answered questions as to my age and profession, I was sent to another small group. Once more, we were driven to another hut and grouped differently. This continued for some time, and I became quite unhappy, finding myself among strangers who spoke some unintelligible foreign languages. Then came the last selection, and I found myself back in the group that had been with me in the first hut. They had barely noticed that I had been sent from the hut to hut in the meantime, but I was aware that in those few minutes, fate had passed me in many different forms. When the transport of sick patients for the rest camp was organized, my name, that is my number, was put on the list since a few doctors were needed. But no one was convinced that the destination was really a rest camp. A few weeks previously, the same transport had been prepared. Then, too, everyone had thought that it was destined for the gas ovens. When it was announced that anyone who volunteered for the dreaded night shift would be taken off the transport list, 82 prisoners volunteered immediately. A quarter of an hour later, the transport was canceled, but the 82 stayed on the list for the night shift. For the majority of them, this meant death within the next fortnight. Now, the transport for the rest camp was arranged for the second time. Again, no one knew whether this was a ruse to obtain the last bit of work from the sick, if only for 14 days, or whether it would go to the gas ovens or to a genuine rest camp. The chief doctor, who had taken a liking to me, told me furtively one evening at 9:45, "I have made it known in the orderly room that you could still have your name crossed off the list. You may do so up until 10 o'clock. I told him that this was not my way, that I learned to let fate take its course. I might as well stay with my friends, I said. There was a look of pity in his eyes, as if he knew. He shook my hand silently, as though it were farewell. Not for life, but from life. Slowly, I walked back to my hut. There I found a good friend waiting for me. You really want to go with them? He asked sadly. Yes, I am going. Tears came to his eyes, and I tried to comfort him. Then there was something else to do, to make my will. Listen, Otto, if I don't get back home to my wife, and if you should see her again, then tell her that I talk to her daily, hourly. You remember. Secondly, I have loved her more than anyone. Thirdly, the short time that I have been married to her outweighs everything, even all that we have gone through here. Otto, where are you now? Are you alive? What has happened to you since our last hour together? Did you find your wife again? And do you remember how I made you learn my will by heart, word for word, in spite of your childlike tears? The next morning, I departed with the transport. This time, it was not a ruse. We were not heading for the gas chambers, and we actually did go to a rest camp. Those who had pitied me remained in a camp where famine was to rage even more fiercely than in our new camp. They tried to save themselves, but they only sealed their own fates. Months later, after liberation, I met a friend from the old camp. He related to me how he, as camp policeman, had searched for a piece of human flesh that was missing from a pile of corpses. He confiscated it from a pot in which he found it cooking. Cannibalism had broken out. I had left just in time. Does this not bring to mind the story of death in Tehran? A rich and mighty Persian once walked in his garden with one of his servants. The servant cried that he had just encountered death, who had threatened him. He begged his master to give him his fastest horse so that he could make haste and flee to Tehran, which he could reach that same evening. The master consented, and the servant galloped off on the horse. On returning to his house, the master himself met death and questioned him. Why did you terrify and threaten my servant? I did not threaten him. I only showed surprise in still finding him here when I planned to meet him tonight in Tehran, said Death. In Auschwitz, I had laid down a rule for myself, which proved to be a good one, and which most of my comrades later followed. I generally answered all kinds of questions truthfully. Alexander Solzhenitsyn talked about the truth in the Gulag Archipelago and how the entire Soviet system was built on a pack of lies. Václav Havel, in another book, which we have not yet read on the podcast, but we will in the future, The Power of the Powerless, he was a Czech writer, and he initially believed in Marxism and socialism, and then he saw the lies that Marxism and socialism were built on, and he wrote Power of the Powerless, or The Power of the Powerless, understanding that, well, while the system that they were in Marxism was characterized as a dictatorship, it was actually built on a metaphysical foundation of lies and lying. The East German Stasi, at one time under communism, claimed that well over 40% of the population in East Germany was a spy for the Stasi. By the way, those were the folks that could get you sent to the Gulag for a 20-year bit. And of course, let's not leave the Chinese communists out of this, particularly with the virus of unknown origin that swept through the world in 2020. Let's not forget that they're communists, and they lie too. You cannot have a system of ethics at a nation-state level or at an individual life. By the way, Milan Kundera proved this in Unbearable Lightness of Being. You cannot have moral clarity based on lies. Instead, you are going to be destroyed by the acidity of moral weakness. And it's going to eat down all the way to you as the individual, from the state all the way down, and then from the individual all the way up. It destroys the hierarchy. Now, there are three kinds of lies that everybody knows, famously from Mark Twain: lies, damned lies, and of course, statistics. But then there's the fourth kind of lie.
What are the three?
Lies, just general lies, damned lies, and statistics. Those are the three big ones that I believe was Twain identified those. But there's also a fourth category, and it's a lie about the fundamental nature of reality itself. It's a lie. Well, it's a lie about what a man or a woman can be. We're talking about biology. It's a lie about how economics works, or it's a lie about the nature of relationships between people. All systems that work rely on a social agreement about the truth, capital T. And when individual people abandon the social agreement, as was evidenced in man's search for meaning, for the ease of going along to getting along, well, the edges of the social agreement begin to fray. This is why the Constitution matters. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of association. These are all integral to telling the truth. And telling the truth should not be an act of bravery, but instead an act of continuing the maintenance of reality itself. How do we get rid of the lies? If we want people to behave more ethically, we got to get people to stop lying, particularly to themselves. How do we get rid of the lies, Richard? How do we stop people from lying? Just first to themselves. Forget to the system, right? Forget to communism or whatever, or a republic. Forget that. In people's own homes, in their own households, in their own families.
Well, if people learn that lying is self-destructive, then they'll stop. But people don't understand that, and so that's. I think that's the only way to do it. If you don't understand that it's self-destructive, then people will keep lying. People lie. The kind of lying you're talking about is done because the person who's lying is doing it for serving himself. Mm-hmm. He's serving himself by lying. He thinks he's serving himself by lying. There are lies that don't work that way, right? And when you want to have a surprise birthday party for someone, so you lie to the person, right? So that's not self-serving. And so if saving another person's life requires you to lie to someone else, or to lie, that's not self-serving. You're saving somebody's life, so that's ethical. Right, but most lies, the kinds of lying you're talking about, is all self-serving, and so it's the opposite. If people understood that it's self-damaging to lie, if you think you're actually helping yourself survive by lying to somebody to serve yourself, it doesn't work. It's the opposite. So it's just people don't understand it. And so now there are cases where you have to lie in order to survive. There are certain cases there where you have to lie to survive, and in those cases, it's probably ethical to lie. So you have to understand ethics in order to know when it's appropriate to lie and when it's not appropriate to lie.
Right.
A lie just means you're covering up the truth. A lie is something that covers up the truth. Mm-hmm. That's what a lie is. And so sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. That requires wisdom. Mm-hmm. And so most people are operating in order to survive. Most people's decision making is for their own survival. That's biologically how we're designed. The biology is designed for survival, and it's sending every signal that goes into your mind that you didn't generate, that just flows in there. It's all survival based. And most people don't realize that. So they're listening to all that stuff, that voice, that's all those signals, the thoughts, the feelings, the body sensations, the emotions, the desires. They're listening to all that stuff. They think it's them. They think that's them talking to themselves. It's presented to them that way. That's go back to the Garden of Eden. There's only three voices in the Garden of Eden: the voice of wisdom, the voice of the opposite of wisdom, which is the villain,
Mm-hmm.
and the villain is presented in the Bible as a friendly creature.
Right.
And he's the opposite. He's the opposite. He's the enemy. He's not a friend. And so, if you can't distinguish the two, you're screwed.
Not to put too fine a point on it. Okay, so both Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago and Havel in Power for the Powerless and Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning both circle around the same idea of telling the truth, right? So when Frankl says, I decided I was going to answer all questions truthfully, the ellipsis on the end of that is, even if it led to my death, which it very likely in a situation like that, like you're going, the tension, am I going to the gas chamber today or not? Like you're living with that in ways that, again, I'm not minimizing, I want to be highly respectful of the account. We cannot imagine that kind of terror and constantly living under that kind of terror because we have nothing like that right now. As bad as things might have been during COVID, no one was getting put on trains and put in ovens.
Exactly.
So let's all be real here for a minute. However, there is a discussion to be had and an argument to be made that what gets you to the trains and gets you to the ovens is a series of lies. Lies that are told gradually, that whole smash mouth incrementalism thing, and that are believed gradually and then are acted on gradually. The most important thing, other than committing to tell the truth yourself, I think, is if you see a lie or hear a lie, you confront the lie. And of course, when you confront the lie, you confront the liar. People struggle with this. What advice do you have for folks, particularly for leaders? Because leaders are the ones that are typically, they have this responsibility foisted upon them, right? I can think of many times when I've been leading groups and a person in the group will come to me and will say, hey, Richard, or hey, Bob, or hey, John, or hey, Amy, they're doing this thing and it seems pretty deceptive and good luck. And then they sort of hop, skip away into the verge there, right? Like Homer going back into the shrubbery in that meme, right? And they expect you to solve the problem. And congratulations, they've handed you this. They've handed you this thing that you now have to be accountable for. How do leaders in situations like that? How do you confront liars? And actually, that was really hard for me because if I didn't hear the lie, I'm getting a third report of the lie. Now I have to separate that out from rumor and gossip and myth and storytelling. I have to go do investigation. There's all these steps I have to do. And at the end of the day, I still might not find out the capital T truth, and I still got to go confront that person. So how do leaders confront liars?
Well, I'll tell you how I do it. First of all, a true leader is serving his people. That's his purpose, is to serve. And when you serve your people wholeheartedly, they will serve you in return, naturally, unless they're, unethical.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so if you know that somebody that you're dealing with, you're a leader, so you're dealing with somebody, I'm assuming they're either reporting to you directly or they're somehow they're in your organization. So I know that person, if he's resorting to lying, his life is not, he's in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
He's in trouble. And so I would invite him into my office and I would sit down with him. And coming from a place of compassion and empathy, and kindness and service, I would start to talk to him about what it is that, I'm observing. And I will, as he responds to me, I will get a sense of whether this person is someone that I could coach, someone who I could, coach. Basically, you can't coach someone unless they're willing to be coached. So you have to ask the person, unless you already have a relationship with them such that they're open to your coaching, you have to ask them for permission to coach them. So I would ask the person, I'd like to coach you if I may. You're in my organization. I at this point, I have, I'd like you to remain in my organization, but I need to, I feel the need to coach you because I'm observing something that I think you need some coaching on. And if he says, fine, sure, then I will then proceed to do that. And so that's how I would confront someone who I think is lying or is a liar. If the person's behavior doesn't change, if I don't observe a change, then I would probably terminate the person. Now, Donald Trump, he had a different technique. He was very clever. When he would hire someone new, he would call them into his office, sit them down, close the door, and he would say to the person, "Do I have your loyalty?" Now, when you ask someone that question, you're trapping them.
Right.
Because they can't say no. So they're going to say yes. And when they leave you, when they left Trump's office, now they know they have to prove to Trump that they're actually loyal. And that's going to drive their behavior, their performance. They now have to prove that they're really loyal because that's what Trump's looking for. And so that's how he did it. That's how he would, but that's an unethical method.
Right.
That's an unethical method because you're trapping the person and, that's unethical. And so I just thought I'd throw that in there because I think, he used to do that. I don't know if he still does it. I mean, he met with Comey. Remember he met with Comey?
Oh, yeah. I remember that. I remember all of that. All of that. All those shenanigans. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and in that case, the the challenge of taking that kind of method is that's like taking Tinker Toys to a construction site. That's the analogy there. If you're in a space where politics and power have come together, like Washington, D.C., as sort of perfect bedfellows. And by the way, they've been bedfellows since time out of mind, since it's Moses was in short pants. Then that kind of question just reveals your amateurishness. It reveals that you're operating an amateur hour. And of course, a guy like the FBI director is going to go out and do something different. Of course they are.
When he does that to people, he observes their reaction.
Right.
That's why he does it, because it's a trap, and he wants to see how people deal when they're in that trap. He wants to see if they're really loyal. So that's what he did. Now, when you ask someone for permission to coach them,
right,
you're doing the opposite. You're giving them a choice. You're saying, "Look, I want to coach you. May I coach you?" Now, if the person says no, the person could say no. So, in a sense, here's something very interesting. That could also be viewed as a trap, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's he going to say? The guy reports to you. He's in your organization. You're asking him permission to coach you. What's he going to say? No. So that could be viewed as a trap also. The problem is that asking people questions, when you ask someone any question, and they know you're asking, and it's clear to everybody that you're asking them, the person's asking you the question, you have to respond.
Right.
You don't have a choice. So you're actually being trapped every time someone asks you a question, if the response is not to respond.
Well,
you tell them not to respond.
Right. And we see this with Frankl, right? Like there's some questions he was going to not respond to, right? He just wasn't going to respond.
Right.
Or if he was going to respond, he was going to respond truthfully.
Right. Exactly.
And those are his only two options. He built himself up, he built himself boundaries, right? Which boundaries are a box. And he put himself in a box and he pulled the lid shut. What impressed me about that approach, and I think is relevant for leaders, is even if that approach went to the extreme end of death, that was going to be the approach he was going to take. And that implies a level of clarity as to the nature of the commitment that you're making. And I think a lot of leaders struggle with understanding the clarity of the nature of the commitment they've made when they declare themselves or when they are declared by the organization to be leaders.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. You have to be willing to be fired. Okay? You have to be willing to, if you're going to be a leader, you have to be committed to the truth. You have to be committed to serving people, even if it results in you being fired. That requires courage. To be ethical in an unethical world requires courage. Boom. That's it. You want to be a leader? You have to have courage.
We, in the training stuff that I do around leadership development, and I even wrote about this in my book, 12 Rules for Leaders, which you can pick up everywhere. It's available out. Been out since like April. You can go get it. That's the pitch. We talk about the 3 C's, right? So I built this framework for understanding communication because a lot of the lack of clear communication comes from a lack of clear thinking, and a lack of clear thinking then leads into a whole bunch of other problems for leaders. Anyway, the 3 C's framework. The first C is clarity. You need to be clear. Clear in your own thoughts, clear in what you're thinking. The number of leaders that I consistently encounter who lack clarity in their thinking is kind of stunning. It's insane. But then the second C that you have to have is the ability to be candid. And candid means telling the truth, not the brutal truth, but telling the truth in sort of a Viktor Frankl kind of way. Telling the truth truthfully, answering questions truthfully, choosing to not respond or choosing to delay a response, right? Even if that means you might be fired or you might be not promoted or your status might be reduced, there has to be risk. There has to be, as Nicholas Nassim Taleb would say, there has to be skin in the game, right?
Yes.
But then the third C in that structure, and I don't think those other 2 C's operate, because you can be clear and you can be candid, but this is that all the way to firing thing or all the way to the gas chamber thing. You have to have courage, which is exactly what you just said, and that's the third C. So those are the 3 C's of leadership communication, and we've built an entire model based off of that that we use. We don't overlay it atop ethics, although we probably should, but that framework exists to provide leaders with a roadmap for how to think about confronting liars.
Yeah. The world is hard and dangerous.
Yeah.
You have to have courage to engage the world if you're gonna change the world.
Right.
There's no two ways about it.
Well, and leaders should probably be focused on changing the world. I want to talk a little bit about logotherapy as I sort of round the corner here. And so back to the book, back to Man's Search for Meaning. We're going to move along from Frankl's experiences in a concentration camp. The edition that I have has 3 different sections. So it has Frankl's experiences in a concentration camp, which some versions don't have the other 2 sections. But it has his part 1, the experiences, which is about 112, 115 pages. Then you've got a second part, which is called Logotherapy in a Nutshell. And that's around 60 pages or so, 40 to 60 pages or so. And then you've got a postscript, The Case for Tragic Optimism, which was the speech I referenced earlier that he made in 1984. So I'm going to read from my version, just a little tiny sample, and that'll kick us off to talking a little bit about logotherapy. and as we round the corner on our close here today on Man's Search for Meaning. So, and I quote from Viktor Frankl, Logotherapy in a nutshell, the existential vacuum. The existential vacuum is a widespread phenomenon of the 20th century. This is understandable. It may be due to a twofold loss which man has had to undergo since he became a truly human being, since he fell out of the garden and fell into history. That's my little addition on that. At the beginning of human history, man lost some of the basic animal instincts in which an animal's behavior is embedded and by which it is secured. Such security, like paradise, is closed to man forever. Man has to make choices. In addition to this, however, man has suffered another loss in his more recent development, inasmuch as the traditions which buttress his behavior are now rapidly diminishing. No instinct tells him what he has to do, and no tradition tells him what he ought to do. Sometimes he does not even know what he wishes to do. Instead, he either wishes to do what other people do, conformism, or he does what other people wish him to do, totalitarianism. A statistical survey revealed that among my European students, 25% showed a more or less marked degree of an existential vacuum. Among my American students, it was not 25, but 60%. The existential vacuum manifests itself mainly in a state of boredom. Now we can understand Schopenhauer when he said that mankind was apparently doomed to vacillate eternally between the two extremes of distress and boredom. In actual fact, boredom is now causing, and certainly bringing to psychiatrists, more problems to solve than distress. And these problems are growing increasingly crucial. For progressive automation will probably lead to an enormous increase in the leisure hours available to the average worker. The pity of it is that many of these will not know what to do with all their newly acquired free time. Let us consider, for instance, Sunday neuroses, that kind of depression which afflicts people who become aware of the lack of content in their lives when the rush of the busy week is over and the void within themselves becomes manifest. Not a few cases of suicide can be traced back to this existential vacuum. Such widespread phenomena as depression, aggression, and addiction are not understandable unless we recognize the existential vacuum underlying them. This is also true of the crises of pensioners and aging people. Moreover, there are various masks and guises under which the existential vacuum appears. Sometimes the frustrated will to meaning is vicariously compensated for by will to power, including the most primitive form of the will to power, the will to money. In other cases, the place of frustrated will to meaning is taken by the will to pleasure. That is why existential frustration often eventuates in sexual compensation. We can observe in such cases that the sexual libido becomes rampant in the existential vacuum. An analogous event occurs in neurotic cases. There are certain types of feedback mechanisms and vicious circle formations, which I will touch upon later. One can observe again and again, however, that this symptomology has invaded an existential vacuum, wherein it then continues to flourish. In such patients, what we have to deal with is not a neugenic neurosis. However, we will never succeed in having the patient overcome his condition if we have not supplemented the psychotherapeutic treatment with logotherapy. For by filling the existential vacuum, the patient will be prevented from suffering further relapses. Therefore, logotherapy is indicated not only in neugenic cases, such as pointed out above, but also in psychogenic cases, and sometimes even the somatogenic or pseudo-neuroses. Viewed in this light, a statement once made by Magna B. Arnold is justified. Quote, "Every therapy must in some way, no matter how restricted, also be logotherapy." Close quote. Let us now consider what we can do if a patient asks what the meaning of his life is.
Yeah. I just want to show you something.
Yes.
Did I ever show you this book?
No. And if you can't see it on the, obviously you can't see it if you're listening, so I'm going to read the title of the book that Richard is holding up. It's Paradoxical Psychotherapy, Theory and Practice with Individuals, Couples, and Families by Gerald R. Weeks, PhD, and Luciano Labate, PhD. I don't know what edition it is, but he's holding it up right now, and you can check that out when you're listening to the podcast. I'll have the title of it in the show notes. But go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to say, when I actually discovered that there was such a thing as paradoxical psychotherapy, remember I told you that my intellectual property, my paradigm that I developed about the paradoxical nature of chronic human problems, freedom, and ethics. I started Googling paradox to see what was out there, so I can really understand what this paradox phenomenon is, I found this book. Then I bought the book, and it blew my mind because people start to get well when the therapist places them into a paradox. And so, anyway, I think if you remember when you read Viktor Frankl's book, his main technique is called paradoxical intention.
Yes.
Yeah. So I assert that paradox. If you don't understand paradox, the paradoxical nature of us, then well, I'll put it to you this way: if one does understand it, then you'll have a tremendous advantage in understanding yourself, controlling yourself, preventing chronic problems for you in your businesses and in your personal life, and solving them when you've got them. And so, anyway, that's my pitch.
Well, talk a little bit about, because I do think that when I started reading the Answers for Meaning and I read The Case for Logotherapy and then I read his speech there, I had not had any exposure to a formalized understanding of logotherapy. Literally, the first thing that I thought of was Carl Jung. And then immediately after that, I went right to Jordan Peterson, like in my head. I just went right, like I clicked the two things together, right? Because I think what Dr. Peterson currently is doing in the public, if you're watching him carefully and closely and not just writing him off as some alt-right avatar or somebody who just talks to young men, but I mean, he does, and he's not. What you see is he's doing logotherapy in public. You can see him actually doing it in public.
Interesting.
When you look at a lot of what some of, and by the way, he's probably at the top of the mountain of these guys. That includes a list like David Goggins and Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink, and I'm naming a bunch of names that people will know, which are again politically associated with right-leaning tendencies. But the reality is they're actually apolitical. They're talking about the nature of reality itself, which is exactly what logotherapy does. And it frames existentialism or existential despair not as a philosophy to be toyed with, as Albert Camus framed it, but instead as a vacuum to be filled. I wouldn't even say a problem to be solved, it's just a vacuum to be filled. Would you say that's accurate?
I completely agree. When in the change agent course, very early on in the course, there's one slide on the 3 human factors that are required for personal fulfillment: freedom, meaning, and growth. If you lack freedom, meaning, and growth, you're going to feel a void. You're not going to feel personally fulfilled. There's going to be a void there. And then the person has to fill the void in order to, because that void is like a feeling of suffering. It's an emptiness. It's a suffering. Mm-hmm. And so people look to fill the void in wrong places. That's the problem.
Right.
And so I don't want to go into any more detail than that. No. But I totally agree. There's a void there. Exactly. You got to fill that up with meaning, with something that generates meaning. And
well, I want you to talk a little bit as we turn the corner here, because we're at the close of our time together. And I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and talking passionately with me about Frankl, about meaning, about ethics, about evil. Sort of wandering through my brain battlefield as I sort of wind through these different concepts, and as we try to bring meaning to leaders, right? Try to get them to understand ideas that I think are having a direct material impact on them right now.
I just want to offer you the opportunity, if you'd like to do some R&D with me. We could do a project where we teach some of your clients the change agent and see how that impacts their effectiveness as being a leader.
Well, let's talk about that offline. Absolutely. That's a great idea. For those of us who are listening, though, to the podcast, how do we get engaged with the Change Agent course? What is that? And how can that help leaders stay on the path? Why don't you go ahead and talk a little about that? And we'll have links to where you can get a hold of Richard Messing, Cotel Group, the Change Agent, and all that. But talk a little bit about that here as we close.
Sure. So the Change Agent course is offered as a program through the Cotel business community. And the Cotel business community is at Cotel Business, Kotel business.org. If you go there, you'll see the landing page, and then you click on programs, and you can read about the Change Agent course. It's free. It's free to become a member of the community, and it's free to take the course. So I already talked about what the course is about. I don't want to go into that again. And so I'll provide Hassan a link to a one sheet on the course so that you can read about the course.
Awesome. Yes, we will have that link in the show notes below the player of this episode. So you'll be able to click right on it and go ahead and take advantage of that. And of course, we will have links to all the different places where you can connect with Richard across the internet. And I want to mention here at our close that if you think the things of the spiritual or the emotional and the logical don't matter nearly as much as the things in the material world that you can touch, taste, see, or smell, you have been deceived. Leaders have a responsibility in order to engage with the world. And part of that responsibility is understanding that deception requires both a target and a user. Leaders need to be clear-eyed in this understanding, not to be deceived. Leaders need to be clear about their ethics. They need to be courageous in their pursuit of the truth. They need to understand that it is in the small fights and the small details, sweat the small stuff, where problems, where the train can go off the track. Frankl wasn't looking to go to a concentration camp, just like Solzhenitsyn wasn't looking to go to the Gulag. But these situations happened. And I take from Alexander Solzhenitsyn here a couple of ideas that I think Frankl would say are correct. The line between good and evil runs through every human heart. It's not just the heart of our politicians or of our celebrities. It's not just the heart of quote unquote important people. It's the heart of the average human being, the average leader in the average town doing average things. Where do you think they got the guards at the gulags from, or the Nazi SS guards? The shopkeeper can put on jack boots and be a thug too. Just like the shopkeeper can put up a sign that said "Workers of the World Unite." The courage to recognize the small things and the courage to recognize how far down along the path you are, by the way, first in your own family, is the courage of leadership. I already mentioned Jordan Peterson, and so I'm going to give him a shout out again. He says, make your own bed. If you could figure out how to do that, if you could figure out how to fix your own family, if you could lead the people that are in your own house first, then guess what? You are making steps towards leading people in your community. You need a chip. You need the credibility. You need the ability. And you need to earn it. No one's just going to give you that responsibility. No one's just going to hand it to you. And by the way, you don't have an opportunity to take it. That's theft. When you stay on the path as a leader and you begin that walk in your own family, then and only then can you behave ethically, can you find meaning, and can you wind up in the clearing at the end of the path where you save not only your family, but also the community. And by extension, you become part of the solution to the problem of saving the West. I'd like to thank Richard Messing once again for coming on Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And with that, we're out.
Thank you.